What's going on? It seems like the destruction is deliberate. The policies that our lawmakers are instituting are impoverishing their people. And this is happening in the UK, in Ireland, in Europe, and the United States. Is this destruction deliberate? And that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. I'm going to be explaining to you the Cloward Piven strategy. Now, before I start, I want to check that my VPN is on, nordvpn.com/cryptorich. That's my affiliate link. It'll give you up to 2/3 discount on some of their packages. And this ensures that the data going in and out of your computer is encrypted and can't be spied upon. nordvpn.com/cryptorich. All right, this is a tweet or a series of tweets, a tweet thread put out by Richard Poe at Real Richard Poe. I shall link to this in the description below. And he goes through the Cloward Piven strategy in this thread. And this is a method devised by a couple of university lecturers in the 60s in the United States for toppling governments. And how it works is by overloading the system with impossible demands until that system collapses. Now, Richard posted this Twitter a few days before, I think the day before the election. I'm recording this on Tuesday, the 5th of November. He posted this on the 4th of November, which is why he's talking about the mayhem we'll likely see in coming days has been planned. Now, the plan has a name, the Cloward Piven strategy. Its intention is to deliberately destroy a nation. It's happening in the US, it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in Ireland. Now, Richard has written about the Cloward Piven strategy in his 2006 book, The Shadow Party. And you can link to it through this this Twitter thread. And it was named after Columbia University social work professors Richard Cloward and Frances Fock Piven, a married couple. They presented their plan in a May the 2nd, 1966 article in The Nation. And they called for a new movement to bankrupt New York's welfare system by flooding it with impossible demands. Now, when they published the article, activists were abuzz over the plan, which was variously dubbed the crisis strategy, the flood the rolls, bankrupt the city strategy, or just simply the Cloward Piven strategy. And this would become the playbook for shadow party radicals working for regime change. Now, I can see this happening in the UK with lots of city councils, local authorities going bust, running out of money. So then the government steps in and then is able to centralize control and take away control from local people, but also the facilities, the services that are being provided for local people, they get run down. Now, Cloward and Piven didn't seek to provide more welfare services for the poor. They sought the opposite. Their goal was to destroy the welfare system, leaving poor people bereft. Deprived of all benefits, the angry poor would rise up in revolution. That's their plan. And one of the ways they did this is by proposing a massive drive to recruit the poor onto the welfare rolls. Cloward and Piven calculated that persuading even a fraction of the potential welfare recipients to demand their entitlements would bankrupt the entire system. Now, don't you see that happening with the mass migration? We don't have growing economies that need the workers in order to fuel the growth in production and the expansion of the economy. No, resources are already scarce. We already have a cost of living crisis. Governments are taking steps to reduce farming production. And then they're bringing in hundreds and thousands, in the United States case, millions of people without work, unvetted, don't know who they are, spreading them around the country like they're doing in the UK, like they're doing in Ireland, like they're doing in the United States, and giving them money. They get benefits in the UK, mobile phones, hotel accommodation. The mainstream media presents it as these asylum seekers. Well, you'd only know that if there was some sort of vetting process going on. But what it's doing is it's creating a greater demand for a shrinking share of resources. Inspired by the race riots breaking out across America, Cloward and Piven hoped their flood the rolls, bankrupt the city strategy would trigger a wave of black violence that would terrify Americans into accepting socialist government and a guaranteed living income for all. I can see how that's being played out in the UK. So small businesses are being crushed by the rises in a tax called national insurance, that small business employers now have to pay more of this tax, and the threshold for when it becomes due has been lowered. And small businesses are the biggest employers in the UK, and this will impoverish the middle classes. Then also the minimum wage has been raised, which will also increase the costs on small businesses. And this is happening at a time of rising food prices, diminishing energy because of rising food prices, rising energy prices, the sanctions on Russia, the cost of fertilizer has gone through the roof. The government's disincentivizing local farming production, so food will need to be imported. That'll be way more expensive. The government's printing more fiat, more pounds. That's going to raise the nominal cost of things as the purchasing power of the pound collapses. And then at some point, as the poor get poorer and the middle classes get poorer, the government's going to say, we need UBI, universal basic income for everybody. It's the only thing that makes sense. And of course, in order to get UBI, we're going to need digital IDs and a central bank digital currency. And one of the things that got announced on the budget in the UK that didn't get any publicity is the government has set up a department for digital IDs. Now, nobody voted for that. This strategy is being reproduced in the European Union and also in the United States, Australia, New Zealand. In fact, all countries that have been captured by the WEF. To this end, Cloward and Piven created the so-called welfare rights movement, installing black radical professor George Wiley at its head. Now, it's important to have a black-led movement, or at least the appearance of such, for street cred. Now, don't you see that going on with the woke movement, with BLM, with Antifa? They have been captured by the elites, by the corporate elites, by the oligarchs to do their bidding. And anybody who argues for traditional conservative values such as small government, decentralized power, family, faith, is labeled as fascist, as right-wing. They are smeared and othered. And that gives credibility to the BLM puppets and the Antifa puppets that are being used by the elites. In the summer of '67, Wiley founded the National Welfare Rights Organization, moving it into his office in Washington, D.C. He then set to work putting the crisis strategy into effect. His followers invaded welfare offices, often violently, bullying social workers and loudly demanding every penny to which the law entitled them. From 1965 to 1974, the number of single-parent households on welfare soared from 4.3 million to 10.8 million, despite mostly flush economic times. Now, Wiley's militants did their greatest damage in New York City, hugely expanding the number of people on welfare and effectively bankrupting the city in 1975. Now, this drive to get people on welfare was a change from what Wiley had been campaigning for before, was for people to work and to get off welfare. New York's fiscal crisis was directly caused by welfare increases spurred by the Cloward Piven activists. Now, the welfare rights movement failed to push America over the brink. Instead of embracing socialism, US politicians turned to the right. Undaunted, Cloward and Piven moved on to their next project, the voting rights movement. They sought to do to the voting system what they had previously done to the welfare system. While they pretended to seek greater voting access for the poor, their true goal was to destroy the voting system, which they saw as a tool of the ruling class. Now, this is a really, really important point, which I want to draw out here. The pretense is a mask for what's really going on. If you think about what's happened with regards to the recent large-scale reorganization of society due to a certain disease that was going around and the medical intervention, the pretense was that it's safe, effective, and necessary. But the reality is it's toxic, has had really bad short-term results for many, many people, and will have really bad long-term results for many, many people. And all it takes to come to that conclusion is a detailed examination of the ingredients, which we weren't allowed to know about. But you can find out by looking on the independent media. So there's what they pretend and then what it's really about. The pretense and what's really going on running the show. Cloward and Piven would do to the voting system what they had previously done to the welfare system. They would flood the polls with millions of new voters. Just as they had previously flooded welfare offices with violent protesters angrily demanding their entitlements, Cloward and Piven now plan to flood election boards and polling stations with lawyers, activists, and phantom voters, making orderly elections impossible. Sound familiar? That was certainly the case in 2020, and now in 2024, the election is happening today. There's already been loads of shittery going on in different states and different polling booths. Let's see. In the 1980s, Cloward and Piven set up a nationwide network of voting rights groups led by veterans of their welfare rights movement and largely funded by government grants as well as by George Soros. That great humanitarian George Soros. The voting rights movement pushed mail-in voting. It opposed voter ID and proof of citizenship. Its lawyers and activists terrorized poll workers and election officials. The US election system descended into chaos, culminating in the Florida recount crisis of 2000. So, in the United States, you need ID to drive a car, you need ID to go to a nightclub, you need ID to buy alcohol, you need ID for all sorts of things. But you don't need ID in order to vote because ID is racist. And the requirement that somebody shouldn't have to provide proof of citizenship means that anybody can come in and vote. But then that seems to be the plan for the Democrats with their open borders. People can come in. There are states where the Democrats have said, no, 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 you cannot ask people for ID. I mean, it's just completely absurd. Now, I am a British citizen. It's completely absurd that I should get to vote in an American election. And it's completely absurd that an American should come over here and then vote in a British election. No, get citizenship first and come here legitimately. During the 2004 election, the voting rights movement and its allies, including George Soros, escalated their provocations, alleging a coup plot by the right wing, disrupting the certification of the electoral vote and calling for UN election monitors. Now, Richard says that as for tomorrow, i.e. today, which is Tuesday the 5th of November, who knows what's going to happen? Anything is possible. We do now know that the January the 6th insurrection of 2020 was planned and wargamed months in advance by a Soros-linked group. And their plans included a breakup of the United States, which is still likely. Now, he doesn't provide a lot of detail for how January the 6th was a false flag. It was a setup. You can find that evidence elsewhere. But one thing I will say is that the FBI in a congressional committee refused to say to the congressman asking them how many undercover FBI agents were there on January the 6th, just wouldn't say. And then also there were videos at the time that I saw of the police and security forces letting people into the Capitol building. I know from my own experience of being at demonstrations outside the Houses of Parliament, they're really, really secure. You can't get in there because it's so well protected. So how come people were able to get into the Capitol building so easily on that day? Well, the police let them in. And there's many other factors that point to it being a setup. But of course, you won't get that from the mainstream media because of the censorship. If you're just looking like this on the mainstream media, you won't see what's been hidden from your view. Now, Richard goes on to say that the good news is that for 2024, there is a means of resolving disputes, which came about through the Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act of 2020. This created a pathway for an aggrieved candidate for president to challenge election results. Now, Richard concludes by saying, let's hope that the election goes ahead smoothly and the results are accepted by all. And of course, he has to say, quite legitimately, I think, underneath all the mayhem, are the British. The Smartmatic voting machines that are used in America are British. British voting expert Lord Mark Mallet-Brown comes to America this week for a hard sell on internet-based balloting. So there you go, the British elites running the show. The Brits have been doing colour revolutions for centuries. They are, in fact, the world's leading experts on regime change and election meddling. So says Richard Poe, and this argument is laid out in his book, How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. Well worth a read. I'm going to get myself a copy. So in a nutshell, the Cloward Piven strategy is to create so much disruption that the existing structures are overwhelmed, and then the state needs to step in order to bring about sanity and settle everything down. And in doing so, it centralizes more power for itself. And that's what we see going on ever since the beginning of lockdown. And the end goal is the end goal of the Great Reset, which is that you and I won't own nothing, we will eat bugs, and allegedly we will be happy doing so. I don't think so. Be part of the Great Resist. Let's not succumb to the Great Reset. And if you're in the UK, one way you can do this is by lawful tax revolt. Go to probitycode.com and find out how and why, according to British domestic law, it is illegal to pay any taxes, fines, fees, or penalties or levies to central or local government. Please share this video far and wide. Comments and questions in the description below. This is Crypto Rich signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.